Here's a fact. Just because you're practicing it doesn't mean you're really practicing. Not all exercises are created equal. Not all the things that you work on and focus on have the same effect. And there are a few things that can impact major change in your playing if we'll just focus on them. We can throw back to Pareto's principle, that 20% affect the 80%, the 80-20 principle. And it's very true. So in this video, I want to give you 7 things that if you will focus on them, you will stop sounding like such a beginner drummer and a noob, and you'll start sounding like someone that knows what they're doing. Okay, this first one is you're not listening to your sounds and your tones. I can't tell you the number of times I've had beginners come in, I've had intermediate players come in, and they sit down and they play, and maybe they can play something complex, maybe they can do something impressive, or maybe they can't. But the one thing they don't have, and the one thing they're not doing, is listening to the tones coming off of the drums and the sounds that they're creating. So they're not paying attention to the tuning of each individual drum. They're not paying attention to the overtones that is creating. They're not paying attention to the tuning of one tom and how that affects the other. They're not paying attention to how they're hitting the drum, where they're hitting the drum. They're not paying attention to how they're hitting the cymbal, or where they're hitting the cymbal, or what type of a tip the stick has on it, and what that has to do with the sound of the drum and the cymbal. You see, when you hear really experienced players and players that are professionals and the elite at what they do, they don't just play differently. They sound differently. They can sit down and play a Hello Kitty drum set and it will sound different than if you play it. Why is that? This is one of those reasons. Let me give you some examples. Right there, you can see the variety of sounds, both good and bad, that we can get from each drum and from each sound source. And I try to look at them as not labeling them good or bad. I try to look at them as sounds. They're tools that I could use, and some I avoid all the time because, to me, in my ear, there's not quality there. And many of the others I use a lot. This next one, some of you have actually emailed in quite a bit about this, and this is, again, a big difference between sounding like someone that doesn't know what they're doing and sounding like someone that does know what they're doing. This is the difference from me getting hired for a lot of gigs and me not getting hired for a lot of gigs. And that is playing with authority. Authority doesn't have to do with volume, although it can have to do with volume. Authority doesn't have to do with whether you're playing soft or loud. Authority has to do with how you're placing the notes and the commitment behind those notes. And some of you are like, Stephen, I don't get the authority thing. I don't quite understand what you're talking about. Well, let me just, for those of you that are married, let's say you come home and your wife says, "Where were you?" And you say, "I was at the store." Does that sound like a very convincing statement? What if you look them in the eyes and you say, "I was at the store"? One of them is said with authority and one of them is said with a question mark. Now, what are the nuances between those things? That's the key. It's the nuances that matter in these things. For me, breaking it down to something that is like physical that we can work on, to me it comes to the treatment of the space in between the notes. It comes to our conviction behind the notes, so knowing that we are on time, that we are playing the thing that should be played. And also it comes down to not letting other players or the click pull you. So having full control of that click, you know whenever you start playing with it, you have no problem playing to it. You can play behind it, you can play ahead of it, but the click's not gonna push you around. The same way with your band members. If you're following them and you're like, well, maybe my time isn't right, maybe the guitarist's time is better. Psst, usually it's not. So if you start looking at it like that, you start second guessing yourself and you start putting a question mark around your playing. And again, this is a hard one to look at without having a real life band in the setting where you have someone pulling and pushing on you. But all the other players know is they feel that they're not getting what they need from you. The This next one I talked to a lot of you about it. It's called half learning. So if you're like, Stephen, what is half learning? Well, half learning is when you work on something and you work on it and you work on it and you work on it, and then maybe you get a little bored of it, or maybe you start chasing rabbits around in your practice time. So you leave that topic before it fully shows up in your playing. This is called half learning. We have only half learned something, and we haven't learned it well enough where you can actually utilize it and use it in your playing. It's just floating around in there as information that's half-baked. Have you ever eaten a half-baked cake? Like you cut into it and it looks so good on the outside, and you get into it and it's runny and it's mushy and you can taste the dough and the eggs and stuff, and you're like, am I gonna get salmonella? I don't know, maybe I should stop eating it, but I don't wanna offend them. A half-baked cake is a really good representation of a half-baked idea that you've been working on. It's going to stay half-baked, and if you do pull it out, it's gonna sound kind of, when you're going to be able to taste the individual ingredients of it. It's not going to sound in the pocket. It's not going to have authority to it. Many players that I've talked to, many that I've seen clinics of, top of the tops, they talk about how long it takes an idea to come into their playing, sometimes 6 to 12 months. So don't be afraid to dig deep on the topics. This next one is going to make a couple of you angry. The fourth thing is, I see far too many people focusing on the topic of speed, but particularly speed equals fast. I'm gonna tell you a secret. Speed goes both ways. So let's take this groove, for instance. What good is it if I can play it fast, but then I get to a gig and they say, oh, actually this song's at 40, 50 BPM. What good is me being able to play it at 160 BPM? You have to be able to let that groove sit in the pocket at 160 BPM and play the exact same groove at 50 and 40 BPM and still have a deep pocket. So the next time you're in your practice time and you think, oh, I need to get this faster, I need to go up another 10 BPM, I would challenge you to say, hey, what if I went down another 10 BPM? What if I went down 10 more BPM? What if I went all the way down to 35 BPM? You're like, Stephen, it's impossible to play it that slow. It's not. You're just not comfortable with the space in between those notes. You're not comfortable with that speed. This fifth one has come up more and more with social media getting more and more popular. You've heard me talk about it, and that is playing someone else's game and not focusing on your own game. So you pop on Instagram, or you look on YouTube, or you look on Facebook, and you see what someone else is doing or what someone else has accomplished on their Facebook post that they recorded 83 times and then chopped up into 53 sections so that they can put it all together in a 30-second section that sounds like they're doing something, but they're really not. I talked to somebody in my email just this week, just discouraged and wanting to quit the instrument because they were so focused on other people's games, on other people's negativity, on what other people were doing, how much they had progressed and they hadn't progressed that far. Instead of spending your time focusing on other people, spend your time focused on your game, on what you know. What are the 2 to 3 things that you need to get better at in the next 6 to 12 months? Figure that out. Find the material to work on. Plot out a plan. Don't leave the plan till you get there. Once you get there, wash, rinse, repeat. You have to play your own game. When someone beats you in your head, they beat you at the head game, you've lost the entire battle. The sixth one I hear quite often, and that's trying to say everything without really saying anything. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and they talk lightly about 53 topics in about 6 minutes? Now, while they have said a lot, they've not actually said anything of worth or importance about any of those topics. These kind of conversations are infuriating for me. I cannot, as an introvert, I want to talk to you about a topic and I want us to go deep on it, but I just cannot stand the surface skating from topic to topic. It's the same way with your playing. Whenever you go into a drum solo, whenever you're playing a song, and you're trying to use all of your available skills, you're trying to use all of your tricks in one thing, instead of focusing on 2 or 3 important items, repeating those, coming up with phrasing, coming up with different tones, coming up with different ways to say the same thing over and over. In other words, having a conversation about a similar topic. If we're not doing that and instead we're trying to throw everything in there that we know, well, to me, that sounds like you're saying nothing. You take these two clips, and one of them I'm just playing whatever, just whatever comes to mind. There's no rhyme or reason, there's no repeat to it. And then the other, I'm trying to say something. I'm trying to make a statement. Now, whether you like that idea or not, I'm not focused on impressing anyone. I'm simply focused on saying something of value and worth that you'll remember. And the seventh mistake I see beginners making every day, drummers making every day, it's not just beginners, and that is focusing on their gear rather than on their sound. Let me tell you something, it's only to a point that a better snare drum is going to make you sound any better. Past that very small section, we're having to deal with a deeper issue, and that is your sound. How do you sound with the instrument? You heard me talk earlier about focusing on the tones, the sounds you're creating, how you're hitting the drum. This all goes into your sound, how you approach a backbeat, how you approach different patterns, how you approach the subdivisions, the space in between the triplets. All of this goes into your sound, your touch on the instrument. Again, I will liken this back and harken back to any professional drummer of worth can sit down at your drum kit. The drum kit that you say sounds awful, I just need to get a better kit, I need to get Any drummer can sit down there that's worth their snuff and they will make that sound good. They will work with the available tones because you create your sound. Your gear does not create your sound. You sound like you on any instrument. If I play any drum kit, my hope is that I sound like Steven. Now, whether you like that or not, that's a different thing. So instead of focusing on getting more gear, better gear, focus on the gear that you have, because I guarantee you, if you can make that one crappy snare drum sound like you and sound good even though it sucks, when you get to good gear, it's gonna sound all the better.